It's a great honor and a privilege to introduce Jake Shepherd.
Thanks, Les. My presentation is actually on the fourth industrial revolution. And specifically, I wanted to look at what can we as people do in terms of what skills do we need and how do we actually operate in this new world that we're going into in terms of this fourth industrial revolution. And I hear a lot of people talking about the fourth industrial revolution. And I personally don't think that this is a particularly good name for what this actually is. And I prefer a cognitive revolution or a intelligence revolution. And the reason I'm saying that is because if you actually look back in history and you look at the first industrial revolution, well, that's when they started, so people used to do their own knitting and their own weaving and by hand, and then they basically invented machines to start dealing with that, and machines actually operated a lot more effectively. And then you're talking about the second and third industrial revolution, so that's like introduction of steam power, and then you introduce this intimate, like in terms of communications with Morse code, etc. So communication became a lot faster. But all of these things really disintermediated what I'd call our hands or our muscles. And if you look at people, we've got two primary skills. We've got our muscles, our arms and our legs, and I suppose our voice as well is a muscle for communications. And then we've got our mind. We've got our ability to think things through. And what the industrial revolutions did is they actually disintermediated our muscles. So we had machines that could dig trenches a lot faster than we could, that could weave much faster than we could. And really, all we had to fall back on was our cognitive abilities, our brain, our thinking abilities. And today, more and more, what's actually happening, and the reason I call it a cognitive revolution, is our brains are being disintermediated. Jobs that require human intellect are being disintermediated by machines. So you're finding companies producing cars that can drive themselves. The biggest employer in the world is drivers. And all of a sudden, machines are being used to drive more effectively than humans can. And there are other professions so that we wouldn't necessarily think. So any profession where there's a lot of repeatability, that's going to be able to be disintermediated by machines and artificial intelligence. So examples of that are doctors in terms of diagnoses. So machines very quickly are going to get to a point where they can be far better diagnosticians than doctors, the traditional doctors are. And they'll be able to prescribe medication better than doctors could. Lawyers, you don't need lawyers to put together agreements. Machines could do that quite effectively. So you're going to start finding there's going to be a whole host of professions that are going to be disintermediated by this cognitive revolution. And that's something that is really scary. And I think the unknown is always scary. And I think what we need to then do is we'll say, well, what are the skills that we need in order to remain relevant in this world? What are those things that we need to turn to, and what are those things that we need to really focus on to keep ourselves relevant? And this is something that's really, I would say, over the years has made me think very deeply. I've got two kids who are coming up into this new world, this new cognitive revolution world, and I want to make sure that they have a future. So trying to answer this question is something that has actually troubled me for quite a long time. So what are those skills? And what I've actually determined, I think there are three primary skills that we need to learn. And the one is we need to become a lifelong learner, we need to become a human panado, and we need to become a master storyteller. And those are the skills we need. So you would think, well, what is a lifelong learner? So a lifelong learner is somebody who always embraces learning new things. You're always on the lookout for new things to learn, for new areas to develop, and never stop learning. And so I'm sure you can remember that any particular in a particular skill that you might not have had a lot of abilities or deep abilities in a particular area. And what you then need to do is you need to actually put in a lot of effort to actually acquire those skills. So I remember my son really struggling to learn to read early on, and it was something that I knew that it was a skill that he really needed with his learning difficulties. If he could read, a lot of his auditory processing problems could be bypassed by actually taking in information through his eyes. So what my wife and I did is we bribed him with soccer cards. So he was somebody who loved soccer, and he had a great collection. We were starting a collection of soccer cards. So what we did is we bought boxes and boxes of soccer cards, and then when he'd read a page, we'd give him a soccer card. And then when he'd read a book, then he'd have a pack of soccer cards. And by doing that, we actually encouraged him to read. And very soon, he was reading for fun. And he's reading actually then pretty long books, pretty impressive books for fun. So it was something that he had an ability to do, but he just needed to get bribed along the way to actually achieve that. So I think we need to look at skills the same way. We need to actually work out what are those skills. Maybe there's a talent that we have. It's something that we enjoy doing. It's something that we have a knack for, that we all of a sudden turn around and say, well, did I do that? That's pretty amazing. And wow, let's do it again. Those are talents, and they really invest in those talents. So you need to be able to look out for those new skills, invest in them. It takes a lot of practice as well. Work out what you want to bribe yourself with. Maybe what are your soccer cards, and then work really hard on that. And then after you've done that, look out for the next skill to learn. But the trick is to constantly look out for skills to learn and to learn them. And I think what we don't realize in today's world, the advantage of the cognitive revolution, is we have access to the finest teachers in the world via the internet, via YouTube, via sites like Pluralsight, Udemy, Coursera, many sites. You've got access to the best teachers in the world. And use that access, use that opportunity to actually learn and constantly learn. The days of thinking that you can go to university, have a career, and that's it for life, and I can stay in that career for the rest of my life, are finished. Their days are numbered. We have to constantly look out for opportunities. We have to constantly add to our basket of skills. And if we do that on a regular basis and look out for those opportunities and grab them when they come, we can continue to remain relevant in this new fourth industrial revolution, or the cognitive revolution. So the next thing I want to talk about, and I'm sure you're dying to know, what on earth is a human panado? And so obviously panado is a painkiller. It's the quintessential painkiller. And really, so if you've got a headache or a toothache, then you take panado in order to relieve that. But the world that we live in is also full of pain. So if you imagine like a business where you go and you have a job, well, somebody's paying you to do a job that they're not able to do, or it's too difficult for them to do, and and therefore they're prepared to pay you or pay somebody else to do that in their place. And that's why you have a job. So really, there are opportunities all around when you act as a human panado to actually be able to earn an income. So that's another way of thinking about the world. And really, one of the things that when I'm like trying to hire people, what I look for is hunger. So it's hunger for people to improve themselves, to uplift themselves, hunger for them to actually take away the pain that other people have. And that's something for me that is really important. It's also people who say, well, how do I actually make everyone else around me feel good about themselves? Those people who crack a joke, and those people who make the other people around them smile, also relieving a pain in a sense. They're also acting as a human panado. And I think that's what we can actually just realize about life, is that there's full of opportunities, and it's just a matter of actually learning to look and to say, wow, that's something that I could do that would actually make people's life a lot easier, and that's a pain I could take away. And that is what it is to be a human panado. And that is another area that I think is really, really important for us to develop. The last area I want to talk about is the concept of being a master storyteller. And I'm going to start off by just giving an anecdotal story about James Small, who was in 1995. He was part of the Springbok rugby squad that lifted the trophy, the World Cup Rugby trophy. And in 2009, James Small had tried to commit suicide. And he went to stay at his mother's house to get away from all the publicity and to get away from like the people trying to contact him. And the phone rang. And his mother picked it up, and it was the office of the president. And James Small told his mother to prank call, just put it down. And the phone rang again. And it was the same person on the end of the line saying, listen, it's the office of the president, and Mr. Mandela would like to speak to James Small. So he came to the phone and he answered it, and Mr. Mandela said, James, how are you? You know, how did you get here? And James admitted to the president that, you know, since he's been out of rugby, he just feels there's no purpose to his life, and people have forgotten about him, and they don't really. He doesn't feel he's got a part to play anymore. And Mr. Mandela said, you know, James, I actually felt like that as well when I was locked up in jail for 27 years. I also thought people had forgotten about me. But you need to realize that you were part of the class of 95. You're a hero to many, many people, and you're an inspiration to people. And that is your identity. And you've still got so much more to give. And that in that moment, James, just by just seeing that somebody like, you know, President Nelson Mandela could take the time to give him a call out of nowhere and actually bother to, you know, just to speak to him and actually just articulate his value and his purpose to him, that just was a turning point in his life. And I think what's really nice about this anecdotal story is it gives us a way to understand the concept of a master storyteller. Because James had told himself a story that he no longer mattered, that he had nothing more to give, and that no one would mind if he actually wasn't around anymore. And with stories like that can tear you down and it can actually can destroy you. But by actually recognizing, but telling yourself a different story, you can build yourself. And you can not only build yourself, I suppose you can build a nation as well by actually telling yourself the right sort of stories. And I think the other thing that it's important to recognize is that what Mandela did in that case is he held up a mirror, and he showed James how he saw him. And that's something that we can learn to do as well. We can be that mirror to other people, where we can help reshape their stories and show them how we see them and what the potential we see in them, and uplift them through that as well. So that's another aspect of being a master storyteller. And really the whole idea then is to actually look for opportunities and look for, when you see a story, let's say it's a victim or villain story, it's a story where you see yourself as being helpless, to recognize it for what it is, which is an unhealthy, bad story, and try and reframe the situation so that you can actually tell yourself a different story and see it in a different light, which actually doesn't paint anybody else as a victim. And so you might ask yourself, why would a reasonable, rational, decent person do what that person did to me? And when you can actually answer that in an honest way, you can realize and recognize that, wait a minute, there are more things here, and maybe it's not that I'm helpless. Maybe there is something I can do about it, and maybe I can change my situation. And that's an incredibly important part of becoming a master storyteller, is reframing and helping other people reframe their questions about themselves. I suppose you could say, instead of telling yourself you're a useless math student, maybe you could say, hey, wait a minute, I've just managed to do one maths problem. I'm sure I can do another maths problem. And maybe I can get the knack of this thing if I just practice enough. So it's those sort of very simple things. And then also just start to look around and say, and look for all the areas that you should be grateful, and have a sense of gratitude for all these many things in our lives that really go amazingly well, for the relationships that we have in our lives, for opportunities that we're given, and actually start reframing the story not as in a sense that leaves us helpless, but in a sense that actually opens us up to opportunity. And those are all done through stories. So, in conclusion, I'd like to say that a true education is caught and not taught. And effectively what we need to be able to do is learn to walk in the footsteps of giants. So Nelson Mandela, from a South African context, and even from a world context, was one of our giants. So he was a lifelong learner, and he said that educational is the most powerful weapon that we can use to change the world. He was a human panada that took on the pain of a nation and healed the nation. And he was a master storyteller that inspired hope for a new South Africa. And if you actually look at many of the positive things that come out of South Africa, much of it actually stems from the initiatives of Nelson Mandela himself. So yes, the future is unclear. We don't know what's going to happen in it. But if we actually achieve these three skills, lifelong learner, human panada, and master storyteller, we can paint the tomorrow where we can become really great.
Thank you so much.